Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, and share buttons. Well, are you prepared for tough times ahead? Now, I believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, but that doesn't mean that we won't have tough times here in the world before that event takes place. I mean, obviously, we've had tough times throughout human history. There's people going through tough times right now, many trials and tribulations right now. Jesus said, you'll go through many trials and tribulations, but take heart because I have overcome the world. But today we're going to talk about what you can do to prepare for some of the adverse events that may be coming our way, such as what happens if they roll out central bank digital currency in the nation where you live, what happens if there's a financial meltdown, a Great Depression scenario, as we've talked about, or hyperinflation, or what if there's a cyber attack or an EMP that takes down your local grid, your local utilities. How are you going to deal with that? What can you do to prepare now? Because I know many of you are ready right now to just rush into the comments section and say, I'm not doing anything to prepare because I put my trust in the Lord. And no doubt you should put your trust in the Lord, but that doesn't mean that you can't also prepare. In fact, you can and should do both. You should be trusting in the Lord and you should be preparing. And we're going to look at some of the Bible verses that tell us that's exactly what we should be doing. So again, before you rush off and say that, I would say, well, if you own a home, do you have insurance in case you have a fire? Or do you just trust in the Lord that, well, I'll be all right, so I'm not going to get insurance? Or have you made plans to pay your utility bill next week or next month? Or do you just sit around waiting for God to take care of everything? I think God has given us the ability to prepare as well as trust in Him. And of course, first and foremost, we should be trusting in Him. So let's talk about what you can do to prepare for some of these adverse events. And before we get into that, many of you will like to hear that these first steps we're going to talk about, they don't require any money at all. If you have no financial resources, very limited financial resources, this isn't about gathering a bunch of stuff. This is about preparing. And the good news is you don't need these abundant financial resources to be able to do many of the things that we're talking about today. Obviously, the more means at your disposal, the more you can do, but it's not necessary. And we're going to talk about why in just a moment. So what should you be doing? Well, first and foremost, the most important thing you need to make sure that you have done to prepare is to know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And we went over that in the last video on Friday. That is the most important. That's why it got its own video. So if you missed that video, just stop right now. Or let me say, if you do not already know Jesus as your Lord and Savior, stop right now and go to that video. I'll pin that at the top of the comments so that there's a quick link and you can do that, because everything else we're going to go over today is completely irrelevant if you do not know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. It's meaningless to do any of these things. So if you haven't done that, leave now, follow that link, and go watch that video. But if you have done that, what are your next steps to prepare? Well, the first thing you should do, because you've taken care of the spiritual part, you know Jesus, the first thing that I believe you should do is start to take care of your mental health. And you start by walking through what are the worst case scenarios. And we talked about some of those things that could happen, central bank digital currencies and grid down scenarios, things of that nature. But it's going to be different for everybody depending on your circumstances. Some people watching this video live in a high-rise apartment in a dense urban environment, and some of you live in a tiny house on a mountain and your closest neighbor is 5 miles away. Some people live on a farm and some people have lots of money, some people have little money, everybody's circumstance is different. So you need to sit down and you need to think of what are the worst case scenarios. If these things happened, what would I do? What are the problems I would face? First you need to establish what are those problems I would face? What would lead to a life and death situation? And start from there devising a plan and a plan of action. And the Bible tells us that that's what we should be doing. We look right here in Proverbs 27, verse 12. It says, a prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. So think about that. Again, the Bible is telling us to take precautions when we see danger, and we certainly see danger in the world today. We also have Proverbs chapter 6, verses 6 through 8 that says, take a lesson from the ants, you lazy bones. Love that word lazy bones in that translation, but learn from their ways and become wise. Though they have no prince or governor or ruler to make them work, they labor hard all summer, gathering food for the winter. And guys, right now, believe it or not, I know that the world is a tough place right now, but many of us, depending on where we live and what our circumstances are, we're living in summer. And we have an opportunity to prepare for tougher times ahead. And so we should be hard at work doing that and preparing, getting ready. So, when you go through these plans and you devise these plans of what you would do, it does many things. First, in the event of a crisis scenario, and not all of these events will happen. You may not go through any of these events. I don't know. Maybe the rapture is later today. I don't know. But even if you don't go through these events, what it does is it helps you mentally prepare so that you're not in a state of panic if one of these things happens. So if you've thought through what you would do in these various scenarios, where you would go, for instance, let's say that the utility grid completely goes down where you are. Do you have a plan to go somewhere else? Well, knowing right off the bat that you're going to go there and being able to take that action immediately could mean the difference between a very good outcome and a very bad outcome, versus if you haven't thought about that at all, and then you're in this situation of high anxiety where everyone around you is panicked and you're trying to figure out what you should do. If you've already thought that through, it's going to give you this calming sense of, this is what I need to do. I know what I need to do. And a lot of that fear and anxiety will go away, and you'll be able to think much more clearly than those around you who haven't thought about those things. So preparing mentally for these adverse scenarios is of great benefit in case any of those scenarios happen. So make sure that you do that. What else can you do? Well, most important, know your neighbors. Know who your neighbors are. Be connected. Do you have family? Some people have a large family that's close by. Some people don't have any biological family at all. But if you don't have any biological family, do you have a church family? Do you have a neighborhood family? Do you know the people that live around you? Have you cultivated good relationships with those people? Talk about some of these scenarios with those people, and what would we do if this happened? And it doesn't have to be that you tell them what if we had a cyber attack and everything went down. It could be something as simple as, what if there's a hurricane that takes out all of the power? Because I live in an area where we have the threat of hurricanes, so people make preparations for that. In California, people make preparations for earthquakes. So talk about just general preparedness with people, and make sure that the people around you are prepared as well too, and that they've thought about these things. Cultivate your skills and your knowledge in various areas, because in the event of a crisis, you want to, being able to have a community God expects us to live in community, not as solitary individuals. But being part of a community, you're going to have a much better outcome than if you're acting alone as a single individual. That community is going to be much stronger. So think about, how can I serve those around me? What skills can I develop? Do you know how to administer first aid and medical treatments? Do you know how to grow food? Do you know how to fix things? What do you know how to knit? Can you make clothing? What are the skills that you either have or that you can develop that could serve other people? Because Jesus said this, he said in Matthew 23, verse 11, the greatest among you must be a servant. And he said in Mark 10:45, for even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. So we're meant to serve other people. So start thinking about not necessarily, well, what can I do for myself in a crisis scenario, but how can I help those around me? You'll be amazed if you're there offering help, you're going to develop that sense of community even more, because people are going to reciprocate that. They're going to look for, well, how can I serve you? You're serving me. And again, you build that sense of community that's much stronger than an individual acting alone. So again, everything we've talked about so far, guys, doesn't require any funds of any sort. You don't have to have a big bank account to do any of these things to prepare, but you're preparing spiritually, mentally, emotionally. You're developing skills. You're thinking about plans of actions that you can take. You're building relationships with other people. You're developing skills. All of that takes time, but it does not take money. So we should all be able to do it. Then we get into scenarios, of things that might cost some money or may not. Varies. Again, everybody's situation is different. But in a crisis scenario, what do you need? What are the things that you need to survive? Well, obviously you need water, right? So start thinking about the scenario of what happens if the water doesn't come out of my kitchen faucet. What am I going to do? Do you have bottled water? Do you have what if it's a prolonged period of time where that doesn't happen and you run out of the bottled water? Well, do you have a means? Do you have access to water nearby? Maybe a pond, a pool, a babbling brook, a river. Do you have rain catchment devices you can do? What are just start thinking about, how do I make sure that I have a reliable water source in case the municipal water source that I rely on is no longer there? What am I going to do? And I would encourage you, I'm not getting anything from this, but we have one of these. It's a Berkey water filter. And you can check these out, but you can pour, scummy pond water into this. You can take water from a swimming pool and pour it into this, and it will come out the other end as water you can put in a glass and you can drink. So if you don't have one of these or something like it, because they make all sorts of different types of water filters, again, I would encourage you to go find one. And again, I'm not getting any affiliate links or anything from just recommending Berkey. I'm just telling you that's what we have. We have one of these. We've had it for many years. There's all sorts of different, but you have to think through your different scenarios. So for instance, we used to live in our last house in a place where there was a water source in the backyard. We had what I would call a ditch. Some people might call it like a babbling brook or, a stream. It was a ditch, right? It was pretty muddy, scummy water, but it was water and it was always there. So we knew we had that. We also had next door neighbor that had a big swimming pool. And so I felt pretty confident that with a proper water filter, we can get that water if we need it. But now we live in a place where we don't have that water source in the backyard, and we don't have a next door neighbor with a pool. So here's what we're doing right now. And again, I know this costs money, but we are putting in a well, right? We're drilling a well, and we're going to put a simple pump on there. That's a type of hand pump. There are other ones, like I think Bison is another brand that makes these types of hand pumps, but it's a stainless steel water pump so that you can turn the handle and water comes out. And so this will guarantee us this water source and some of the adverse scenarios that we see coming. And it's funny because we know the person putting in this well. He's actually a near neighbor of ours. And I think we're the first customer he's ever had that wanted to do this, that wasn't connecting to a sprinkler system to irrigate the grass in their yard, right? Because when he said, oh, we don't have a sprinkler system. Well, why are you getting this? Well, what if the grid goes down? And his initial response was, well, I've been here 30 years. It's never gone down. They have, backup generators and all sorts of redundancy built into the system. But guys, just because something hasn't happened doesn't mean that it won't happen. And 30 years ago, we weren't as connected to the internet as we are now, to where the local municipality wasn't as vulnerable as it is today to a cyber attack that could take down those systems and the ability to deliver water. So my hope is we'll put this in and it'll be, a nice lawn ornament, very decorative piece that we never have to use. Or, and maybe it'll be there after we're gone for somebody else to use. I don't know. But we'll have peace of mind knowing it's there, and that not only will it supply water for our family, but other people around us as well. So this is, it's one area where we've seen a vulnerability and we're trying to correct that. And God willing, nothing will happen between now and then that we would need it. But once we have that in, if we do need it, we have it there. And if we don't, that's okay as well. I'd rather have that peace of mind, just like you don't regret buying insurance and then not having to use it. Say, wow, I got that auto insurance and I didn't get in a crash. I really wish that I had the opportunity to use that. That's not the mindset you should have. You should just be thinking of what can we do to, push this risk aside, make ourselves a little less vulnerable. So anything that you can think of to make that happen, start to working on that. So we've talked about water. Water is important. Make sure that you have access to some source of water. And again, probably your most cost effective would be finding a good water filter if you have any sources of water nearby that you can tap. And again, if you live in an area with abundant rain, you should be able to maybe use rain catchment systems to be able to do that. So next, you need food. What happens if, for whatever reason, we have one of those scenarios and the grocery stores, the restaurants nearby, simply run out of food? The supply chain is shattered and the food is no longer there. How deep is your pantry? How long could you live? If the grocery stores and restaurants had no more food, how long could you survive? Do you have 2 days of food in your house or your apartment? How much more can you fit in there? Start thinking about that. Start building a deep pantry. So one of the things we have this right here. This is beans that are vacuum sealed in this package. It's like a little brick. We have same thing with rice. So if you have rice and beans, that's all you need. If you have rice and beans to be able to survive. And if those things are vacuum sealed, and again, there's whole channels on all over the internet, websites where you can learn how to do that using, food saver devices and other things. You can learn how to preserve food I would encourage you to do that if you can, because properly sealed and stored, that food can last 20, 30 years. And so when you're preparing, if you set that aside, hopefully you never have to use it. But what if you need it? What if you've prepared with food that has a 2-year shelf life and the crisis happens 5 years from now and that food's gone bad? So the longer you can push out the shelf life of that emergency food, the better off you're going to be. But again, if you're on a budget, just buy a little bit more than what you normally do over the course of several months. Build out a deep pantry. Again, buying food you normally would eat, and then just rotate out eating the oldest food first. And once you reach a certain point, then you can go back to buying what you normally buy. But again, think of the times in which we live with inflation. That's a good investment too, to be able to buy the food you're going to eat 6 months from now. Because what are the odds that if you buy a can of soup today, it's going to cost less a year from now? I'd say those odds are very low, if not zero. Best case scenario is it costs the exact same thing, in which case you haven't really lost anything. But odds are it's going to be 10, 20, 50% more a year from now than it is today. And so think of how many investments you can make. Could you invest in the stock market and be pretty well assured that a year from now, those investments will have not lost anything and will have a high likelihood of being up 10, 20, or 50%? That's that. Most of you would jump on that. Well, that's the scenario we face with food right now. So build a deep pantry. Make sure you have access to weeks, months, however much you feel comfortable having. Again, everybody's scenario is different. Some people live in smaller areas where they don't have the ability to set aside a lot of food or store that. Again, you don't want to overdo it, and we're going to talk about that later as well, but you want to make sure that you are properly prepared. Another thing you can do is learn how to grow food. Again, you don't have to have a giant farm and grow so much food that you can feed yourself with what you're growing, but just start small. Put a little plant on your balcony. Learn the skill set. Again, going back to skill sets, learn how to grow something from a seed into some sort of plant or tree that bears fruits or vegetables, and then how to harvest those seeds, how to preserve that food, the fruit of that harvest, how to gather the seeds, store the seeds, and then plant them again during the next season so that you can keep that going. If you learn that skill set on a small scale, again, just some plants out on your balcony or your porch or in your kitchen window, if you learn how to do that, and you learn how to do that well, then you can scale that up if the time ever comes that you need to do it. But the last place you want to have that learning curve is when you need to do those things and you haven't put any thought into it at all. Start preparing now. Learn as many skills as you can now so that you're able to do that. So what else do you have to think about? Well, you got energy. Again, if your grid goes down, if you're not receiving electricity or natural gas from the local utility, well, how do you deal with that? Do you have any sort of backup gas-powered generators or solar-powered generators that can help see you through that time? If it's a long-term scenario, how do you cook? Are you able to cook over an open flame where you are right now? Do you have the proper pots and pans and utensils to cook over an open flame, even if you can build a fire and set up a place to be able to do that? Do you have, they sell these solar-powered thermos-like devices where you can use the sun to boil water, and then you can use that to cook rice and beans. So there's all sorts of different scenarios, but think about, where do you live? What do you have? If you've got a fireplace, that's great. But if you have natural gas powered logs in a fireplace, and you lose access to that natural gas, where's your warmth going to come from? Back in Texas, and I think it was January 2021, we had some grid down scenarios there based on an unusually cold winter temperature, and the grid hit this peak period of overload, and a lot of people lost access to electricity, natural gas. They couldn't heat their homes, and they had to go out into the car and turn the car on to try to stay warm. I'm sure many of you saw those videos of people doing that. But think about, okay, if you don't have a fireplace that you can put some logs in the fireplace and get warmth, what are you going to do? So start thinking through those scenarios. We have right here, this is a emergency sleeping bag. See how small it is, but it folds out to be as big as I am. It's this very thin, durable material, and it reflects, I think, 80% of your body heat back at you. And so you can go out into the snow in the wilderness and climb into one of these and stay warm for the night. And so it was, I don't know what they are now, and I can't remember where I got that, but I got those for like $8 a piece several years ago. And we have enough to take care of ourselves, some other family and friends for just such a scenario as that. It's a good idea to throw some of those in the back of your car because you never know what could happen. Here in Virginia, I think it was about a year and a half ago, on I-95, they had this snowstorm come out of nowhere. A bunch of people got trapped in their cars along I-95, and they were cold. And if they had had these in their car, they would have been able to use these. So you need to prepare for situations like that. Make sure that you have any tools or supplies that you need to take care of a situation like that. What about protection, guys? Are you able to defend yourself? Because again, if you gather the food, the water, the resources that you need to be able to survive, what happens if somebody else comes and wants to take those things or harm you in some way? Are you able to protect yourself if the police can't come, right? If you have a scenario like that where the police are unable to get to you, again, we don't have to have the end of society for something like that to happen. Look at things like Hurricane Katrina. There can be certain times when you have a disaster and there's no law and order in a certain area for a certain period of time. Are you able to defend yourself? Do you know self-defense? Do you have the tools at your disposal to protect yourself and your family? Do you have the training you need to be able to do that? That's an important vulnerability that you need to make sure you fill if you haven't done so already. So then what about financial means? So again, there are all sorts of scenarios we've been talking about. I believe we're going to see a depression on par with the Great Depression. We'll call it Great Depression 2.0 coming in the very near future. What does that mean? How do you prepare for that? Again, having a deep pantry is a good thing to do going into a scenario like that. On the other side of that, I think the politicians are going to print so much currency that we're going to see hyperinflation. So you need to, again, know what to do in these scenarios. And many people, our grandparents or great-grandparents, went through the Great Depression. We've heard those stories. We know those stories, so we know somewhat of what to do and how they dealt with that. But hyperinflation is something that most people haven't gone through. And so we don't have as firm of a grasp of it. So I'd recommend checking out these two books right here. This one's called When Money Dies, and it gives a good overview of hyperinflation in the Austro-Hungarian Empire and in Weimar Germany following World War I. When you had previously these currencies were gold-backed, then following the loss that those powers had in World War I. They began trying to repay war debts by just printing currency, and it caused massive problems. So you can read real life stories of what people went through in that, of how people who had their assets tied up into this paper system, people who had been civil servants for those nations and had retired on a pension that put them at a high upper middle class income prior to the war. Well, that same upper class middle income pension would barely buy a day's worth of food after the hyperinflation took hold. There were people who were multimillionaires, but they held all of their wealth in the local currency in the bank. And when that currency lost its value, they lost everything. So learn from this scenario, learn from these scenarios, what worked, what didn't. Another book that's I highly recommend because it's more recent is When Money Destroys Nations. And this does the same thing, talking about Zimbabwe, which recently went through this hyperinflation scenario just in the last 10 to 20 years. And so you can learn how ordinary people dealt with that situation. And again, what we'll find is it's not the people that stored up all this wealth and stuff that got through. It's the people who learned skills and had a community, knew their neighbors, worked together with them, and they found a way to work together to get through day to day to day. Because you can store up 10 years of food. If you have a crisis that lasts 11 years, you're going to end up in the same place at the end of that. So learn what's important by reading history, because most of these things we're talking about, they've happened before. How do you learn from the past and learn what's worked in the past to prepare yourself or position yourself to be able to deal with those scenarios if they occur to you as well? So again, I think when we're talking about the possibility of hyperinflation and how we prepare for that, we would do something very similar for central bank digital currencies. So that's a question I get a lot, is people say, how do I prepare for this central bank digital currency? And keep in mind, when we talk about central bank digital currency, while the mark of the beast one day may be somehow related to the central bank digital currency we hear talked about and we see rolled out in some nations, it doesn't mean that central bank digital currency is the mark of the beast. The mark of the beast comes during the tribulation. So we could very well see, and I believe we'll see here soon, central bank digital currencies rolled out on a mass scale. We've certainly seen them, depending on where you live. They're already around and they're already pushing these. But how do you deal with that? How do you get outside of that system? Well, it's going to be at first harder for some than for others. So for instance, if you're independently wealthy and can find ways around this, or you're politically connected, then you're going to be able to delay the negative from this, versus if you are receiving government payments in order to live, whether it's a pension or Social Security or any sort of payment, a pension payment, even a private pension coming from somewhere else, that they say it's going to get paid in central bank digital currency, you pretty much have no choice at that point. But there are things that you can do to get outside of the system. And it goes back to many of the things we've been talking about, building a network, a sense of community with other individuals, learning skills, learning how you can serve other people. I would say skills and hard assets are the key things. So for instance, we talked before about, this is a dime from before 1964. This is made of 90% silver, so it retains its value. It's a store of value that can be used to trade for a dozen eggs with a farmer if that's what you need. And that can get you outside of that system, at least for a time. You know, once we get to the tribulation period, again, I don't expect that we'll be here, but if it, up until that point where they're just really after people who are avoiding the mark of the beast, you can still get outside of the central bank digital currency system through barter and private trade with other individuals. And so silver, gold, those are ways that you can do that. Bricks of rice. If you've got a brick of rice and somebody else has something else that you want, you may be able to trade that outside of that system. And so real things that you can touch and store and move around that are outside of that system. But if all of your wealth is tied up in a number in a bank account, well, then you're going to be in that system, that electronic system. So you want to be able to try to accumulate hard assets that are outside of that system. Here's another idea in addition to some of this, they call it junk silver, these pre-1964 dimes and quarters and things like that. But there's private companies out there putting out things like this. They're called gold backs. And this is a very durable, I think it's vinyl or acetate, I'm not sure what it is, but it looks like a currency. It's very flexible, but it has embedded in it, 1,000th of an ounce of gold or a 500th of an ounce of gold, various levels of gold, so that it will retain its value. It will be a store of value. And so you could see a scenario where people begin trading these outside of that central bank digital currency system. Because again, once they get enough people forced into that system through either government payments or their banks saying that you have to use the system, well, there's going to be no way out. Once they get enough people using that and they roll it out at point of sale, then they'll just force it on everybody, even the people that were holding out on it. So eventually we're going to be drawn into this system. But until it becomes a police state where they hunt you down for not using the system, you still will be able to operate outside of that system with real assets, hard assets, and skills. So hard assets means things like this, like a gold-backed currency or silver, copper, anything of value that you may have that you could trade with somebody else, that you could barter with somebody else. And so, guys, I hope that this has helped many of you. Again, use the comments below to leave, to tell us some of the things you're doing to prepare. Maybe I haven't mentioned some of those things because there's a lot more ideas that many of you have that I haven't necessarily covered. But again, I want to leave you with this. Don't overthink this. Don't worry about it. And certainly don't put your faith in the things you've done to prepare. Our faith should be in God. So I want to leave you with these Bible verses here. We have Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5. It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding." So again, we shouldn't be racking our brain trying to think of how we've proofed our life. We've made it, we've done everything we can for every scenario. No, we haven't. Right? We're still at the mercy of God. So we need to be trusting in the Lord. But again, we should also be preparing. We can do both. These aren't mutually exclusive. We should be trusting in the Lord and we should be preparing. But we don't need to put our faith in that preparation or over-prepare. Let's read this from Matthew chapter 6, verses 31 through 34. This is Jesus speaking. He says, "So don't worry about these things, saying, 'What will we eat? What will we drink? What will we wear?' These things dominate the thoughts of unbelievers. But your heavenly Father already knows all your needs. Seek the kingdom of God above all else and live righteously, and he will give you everything you need. So don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring its own worries. Today's trouble is enough for today." Now, many of you may hear me say that and go, "What were you talking about?" Because you're just telling us to prepare for all these things. But again, there's a difference between seeing a possible threat and making a prudent preparation and letting those things dominate your thoughts or giving you worries about tomorrow, giving you anxiety. You should have no anxiety about this because you trust in the Lord and because He's given you the foresight and the wisdom to prepare properly. And if you've taken that action, you know you've done all you can do, and you relax. You trust in the Lord. You seek first the kingdom of God above all else, live righteously, and He will give you everything you need. So God will take care of you. No doubt about it. And then I want to read this. This is from Romans chapter 8, verse 18. It says, "Yet what we suffer now is nothing compared to the glory He will reveal to us later." Guys, that puts everything in perspective. No matter what we have to endure or go through here on earth, whatever it is, 100 years of perpetual torture, it's nothing. It pales in comparison to the glory He will reveal to us later. One day, we will be with Christ. And guys, we will be there for all of eternity, and this life will just be this speck of time that we hardly even can comprehend anymore. So don't worry about these things. Don't be overly burdened about these things. Again, certainly don't put your faith in the preparations you've made, thinking yourself so wise or invulnerable to anything bad that could happen because of the preparations you've made, because that's putting your trust in preparations instead of putting your trust in the Lord. That's where our trust should be. But at the same time, He's given us wisdom to see a danger coming, to see winter coming, and to be working hard now to prepare for those coming dangers, those coming seasons. And so, guys, I hope that this has helped you to be able to think about what you would do in some of these scenarios, how you would deal with that, what you can do to prepare for that. And so, again, leave your comments below if you have additional ideas of what we should be doing, how we should be spending our time now. Make sure, too, a hard copy of the Bible. That's included in our hard assets, right? A hard copy of the Bible. So many people today rely on their phone as their Bible, and they look at the Bible app, and that's great. That's great that we have Bible apps on the phone. But you make sure you have plenty of hard copies of the Bible or any other books that you might think are of value. But because if you're in a situation where electronics no longer work, well, now you don't have access to the Bible. So make sure you have a hard copy. So guys, again, leave your comments below. Let me know what you think. Make sure to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. And God willing, I will see you on Wednesday. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to sign up for my free monthly newsletter and get your copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Just follow the link in the description to get your free book. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.